this guy's garage. Like and subscribe.
And welcome to meeting number 3 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on National Defence. Appreciate the introduction and the ability to get ourselves started. I'm going to pass it over to Cheryl Gallant to lead us off.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and through you to the witnesses. First, I'd like to mention that the troops are still waiting for that pay increase that was promised to them on April 1st. So a week ago today, Taiwan Ambassador Harry Tsang hosted a session on maritime security. We learned about the intentional undersea cable cutting in the Baltics, Europe, and Taiwan. How prevalent is the gray zone tactic along Canadian shores, cutting undersea cables?
Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Perhaps I'll just zoom out a little bit about gray zone tactics writ large. We can talk through that and then perhaps get into the details about undersea cables. We've seen hybrid threats and gray zone tactics continue and proliferate over the last several years. We think it underlines the importance of defense investments in order to provide deterrence from a military point of view, but we recognize that when faced with challenges militarily, our adversaries will look for other ways to target us. That includes things like cyber, targeting critical infrastructure, threats to democratic resilience. And so it speaks to the need for sort of a whole of society approach in order to counter these threats, but noting as well that our ability to counter them is based on our ability as well to counter military threats, which underlines the importance of these investments.
Okay, so how often have the undersea cable cuttings happened along Canadian land masses?
Thank you for the question. Something that, in partnership with other government departments and agencies, the Department of National Defence continues to monitor this. There have been incidents in the east coast of Canada, which we are actively monitoring in partnership with allies and partners. And we continue to take proactive and preventative measures for potential for reoccurrence in the future.
Okay, the question was how many as well. In any of these incidents, was there any vessel identified around that time as being close to the path of the undersea cables?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. We continue to work with partners. I do not have that information available at this time. That said, I can commit that the integrated intelligence community are lashed up and working both across the Government of Canada in partnership with provinces and territories and Indigenous stakeholders and, importantly, allies in continental defense in terms of surveillance for detection of all domain threats from seafloor to space.
Do Canadian fishing vessels have access to the charts that show the undersea cable routing?
Mr. Chair, that is not my area of expertise. We can coordinate with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans and the Canadian Coast Guard, who are probably in a better position to provide an accurate response to that question.
Well, the Coast Guard and military are being combined, it has been reported. Do the Coast Guard patrols keep an eye on vessels loitering near the undersea cables?
Mr. Chair, pleased to be able to talk about the Canadian Coast Guard. As colleagues know, on the 9th of June, the Prime Minister announced the merger. At this point, there is no plan to militarize the Canadian Coast Guard or incorporate a law enforcement role. I can speak to the fact that they will be additive in the security domain, as well as surveillance, all domain threats, supporting as well search and rescue, icebreaking in the Arctic, as well as in commercial shipping routes. They will contribute to environmental, ocean science, safe navigation, and fisheries enforcement.
All right. If a fishing vessel noticed another vessel, foreign vessel, loitering along the pathway of the undersea cables, would the crew know who to report this to? It's suspicious activity.
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. Yes. Right now, we have a Canadian Coast Guard that is robust in their procedures, and Strengthening sovereignty and maritime domainess is at the core of their mission. We're right now finalizing and professionalizing the integration of the Canadian Coast Guard with the Royal Canadian Navy and the Royal Canadian Air Force to ensure that we provide integrated awareness to be able to cue exploitation or other assets if we see suspicious activity.
Okay, so it sounds like that they should report it to the Coast Guard. Does the Canadian Armed Forces depend on communications routed through undersea cables?
Yes.
Okay, so the answer was yes. I don't know, Mr. Curran, if that was on the record. Okay, so since it takes 40 days, since it takes 40 days and $3 million to repair a single cable, does D&D have a company on retainer to mend undersea cables on call, on demand?
I'm not aware of a company. Mr. Chair, I don't know whether we have a contract in existence to do that. There are a number of Canadian companies that we can work with in the event of both an accidental or a targeted event targeting our undersea cable networks.
Does the CAF have the personnel and the equipment necessary to do the undersea cable repair itself?
Mr. Chair, that is not currently an autonomous capability that the Canadian Armed Forces has. It does speak to the growing relationship between defence and whole of society, as well as Canadian industry, which we're working hard to strengthen those ties. We are also exploring and expanding, ever present, our capability for surveillance from seafloor to space.
So I'm going to pass it on now to Ms. Lapointe, please.
Major General, I had the opportunity to go to the Baltic regions last year, where we went to Latvia, and I did get to meet some of our Canadian Armed Force members there. It's an impressive brigade that I believe now numbers close to 2,000 members. Mr. Laporte, so like many Canadians, we have a real concern over the rise of misinformation online, with a big source of these campaigns coming from Russia. Can you tell us how Canada is working with NATO and our European partners to counter that Russian hybrid threats, such as cyber attacks and disinformation?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. Canada is very active on the cyber front and on the foreign information manipulation and interference realms. We lead in the G7 what's called the Rapid Response Mechanism, which includes G7 partners, but also the European Union and NATO participants to look in terms of online sources of disinformation, misinformation, to try to correct those and adjust responses. And we're also, that mechanism really looks at open source information, develops skills and tools and capacity building for society and civil society organizations. There's capacity building involved in that to NATO allies, NATO partners, so beyond just NATO allies and other areas. So Canada is very active in that sphere. That's from a global affairs perspective. I know our Canadian security establishment is also very active in that field, and as is the Canadian Forces Cyber Command.
Okay. Do I have time remaining, sir?
You have another minute.
Okay. A minute. I'm going to ask very quickly then, Major General, from a military readiness perspective, what are some of the Canadian Armed Forces' greatest challenges in meeting simultaneous commitments in Europe and in Indo-Pacific?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. So we are seizing the opportunity that's been provided to us by Canadians and the Canadian government for focused investment to expand our readiness. That said, we will see the downstream return on that investment as it materializes over months and years. We currently have the readiness we have based on the investments that have been made to date, and therefore there are fixed forces of which we are working to optimize, but there are choices to be made about how to employ the Canadian Armed Forces based on the global instability that we see around the world.
For the witnesses, I'm looking to explore some capability and threats that our CAF personnel are faced deployed in Latvia. Thank you, General Ritchie, for your service. Could you tell me how many troops we have there right now?
Yes, thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. So the exact number I will pull up, but we fluctuate around 2,200. The number, as I mentioned, maxes out at 3,000 through the episodic commitments of both air and maritime. Presently, we have our air contribution both in Latvia and in Prestwick. As well, we have 3 ships currently contributed to NATO, and therefore we're on the higher end of 2,500, but we do hit 3,000 from time to time.
Thank you. And that 3,000 then is including the ships that are there, or is it just 2,200 approximately on the ground in Latvia?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. So in Latvia, 2,200 is an accurate approximation.
Thank you. I recently visited CFB Edmonton, and I heard about some of the challenges they're facing there. Can you briefly tell me the cycle, the timeline of the cycle for force generation, then their deployment, and then their return, regroup, resting?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Mr. Chair. So historically, readiness models have involved 3 phases: preparation for, the deployment and execution of a mission, and then the recovery and the reconstitution of the force. That has changed for Latvia specifically, where we've moved the force generation training out of Wainwright, Alberta, where it was conducted previously. It is now being done alongside those 13 allies in Latvia with the host nation. We are continuing to assess the duration of the deployments, which will condition the preparation and the recovery time based on the cumulative demand for the Canadian Armed Forces to make sure that we can maximize our contribution to the nation while still supporting our people.
Thank you. Would it be fair to say then that cycle has been compressed over since the deployment began?
Mr. Chair, so the cycle continues to be optimized, and as there's changes in theater, both in Europe as well as support to the Ukrainian Armed Forces, there are adjustments to the cycles. I can't speak to whether a specific group may have had a slightly adjusted schedule.
Thank you. You mentioned extension of 3 years. Based on the troops and the information that I've heard from the base in Edmonton, do you assess this as a challenge for the CAF to maintain this cycle for another 3 years?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. It is indeed our most significant contribution is Operation Reassurance, and for the Canadian Army, the focal point is our commitment to Latvia. At present, we are sustaining our contribution, but it is alongside other emerging global instability. And as we consider potential increases in Latvia, we'll have to do that with a clear mind to other challenges and the choice space that presents.
Thank you. I've heard official statements saying that adding troops to Ukraine based on potential security agreements and guarantees is a possibility being looked at in the future. Will that potential new commitment impact the capability of the approximately 2,200 personnel on the ground in Latvia?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. So this is indeed a global challenge with the fixed forces that we have. At present, we are resolute in our commitment to Latvia, and we see that being unchanged. That said, we are working in collaboration with allies led by the UK and France on the Coalition of the Willing to examine possibilities for force generation of elements across 30 contributing nations to assist in a just peace for Ukraine should a ceasefire be reached.
Thank you very much. And I would like to ask if specifically for Canada, because you referred to other allies, but specifically for Canada, are we going to be able to maintain the approximate 2,000 in Latvia concurrent to a potential commitment in Ukraine?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. Yes, we can maintain the current contribution to Operation Reassurance in Latvia, but it is absolutely informing our capacity to contribute to an expanded mission in Ukraine should the Coalition of the Willing deploy forces on the eve of a ceasefire agreement that may be reached.
Thank you. And you mentioned pre-deployment.
Time is up. We have 5 minutes.
Through you, Mr. Chair. This summer, Prime Minister McGuinty Minister McGuinty. Minister McGuinty and Prime Minister Carney. It's early. We're in Brussels to sign a new deal with European Union states regarding defense procurement, among other things. And I guess my question is to Mr. Curran. Can you tell us more about how Canada is forging new partnerships with EU member states to support Ukraine?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. What I'll do is I'll turn to my colleague from GAC, and then I can provide some additional comments.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yes, indeed, this summer, the Prime Minister, Minister McGuinty, and Minister Anand signed a security and defense partnership with the European Union. That is a partnership that includes work on support to Ukraine, crisis management, cybersecurity, countering hybrid threats, arms control, space security, AI, emerging technologies, enhancing defense industrial cooperation. A big part of that is going to be the defense industrial cooperation. In addition to this security and defense partnership, my colleagues are engaged in, will be engaged in negotiations with the European Union to access safe security action for Europe, or REARM 2030, which, that is a European Union defense plan that has two components. One is up to 650 billion euros in deficit spending allowances for EU member states. That is not what we're trying to be. This is simply the rules that govern the EU members. But there's 150 billion of that is sort of a loan program for defense spending to allow European Union member states to access funds and resources to increase their defense capabilities. So we are negotiating, or we will be negotiating soon with the EU, an agreement to have Canadian firms have access to that pool to be sort of seen as potential bidders and competitors to support the EU.
Mr. Chair, if I could just add, our work with the EU is also important from a defense point of view, in the sense that the EU is very helpful when it comes to things like logistics support, military mobility, working together on advanced technologies. And so we're very proud to work with them through the PESCO projects, the Permanent Structured Cooperation projects, because a lot of the how we fight is predicated on how we get there as well, and the EU can be very helpful from that point of view.
And if I can add one more thing that I should have mentioned, yes, we are forging this partnership with the EU, but at the same time, that doesn't change the fact that NATO remains the core guarantor of transatlantic security, and that is recognized by all European allies.
Yes, and further to that, if I may, I guess to Mr. Duplantis as well, as we've seen Canada evolve in our activities in Europe, particularly in our training in Latvia, in the overall scheme of our relationship with the EU and the united front that we're showing, coalition of the willing, if you as it's been called, is Canada carved out its particular role in that respect?
Well, maybe I can start to answer and then turn it over to Mr. Kern or General Ritchie. I mean, we. Again, we've signed this sort of security and defense partnership with the EU. We have a long-standing relationship with a lot of European allies. We have a commitment to Latvia, which is recognized amongst European allies as sort of a really well done deployment, one that is very multinational and is able to bring in more allies than other similar deployments. And we're also recognized as a very sort of strong in sort of supporter of Ukraine, including in the training sphere, but including also in the capacity development. So I think there is a recognition of Canadian continued interest and contribution to Euro-Atlantic European security. And maybe I could turn over to colleagues if they have anything to add.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just perhaps to add a little bit of color to the coalition of the willing. So that is distinct from the EU that has been referenced. This is a conglomerate of nations, 30 at this time, that are like-minded in protecting Ukraine, rebuilding the Ukrainian armed forces, deterring Russia, and defending values and Europe. The discussions are happening at the political level. Our Prime Minister and our Minister of Defense have participated. There's also cascading discussions that are happening at the strategic, military, and operational military levels. There's an operational headquarters being led by the UK and France in Paris, to which the 30 nations have the opportunity to embed planners and liaison officers to develop robust implementation plans if a ceasefire is reached in Ukraine that could see the potential deployment voluntary of these coalition of the willing member states. Importantly, that would not be a NATO mission at this time. It would have no Article 5 guarantee in its current construct.
Thank you very much. Can you explain why Canada is not pre-deployment training in Canada?
Thank you for that question, Mr. Chair. So in terms of the training, if we're speaking about Operation Reassurance in Latvia, it was historically done in Wainwright, where we had instrumentation support. That said, we would be doing so unilaterally as Canadians. It's not realistic for our 13-member NATO nations to return to Wainwright, Alberta. Additionally, we need to plug that within higher organizations, so a multinational division and a corps, which would be offset in time. And then ultimately, there is a deterrence effect by virtue of conducting the training in location on the front line for which the multinational group is defending. So those conglomerate of reasons have led us to the decision to move the pre-deployment training to Latvia, which was exceptionally well received by Latvia and all the allies.
Okay. I know historically...
You don't have to do anything to do it.
I know historically there have been multinational training in Canada. Is it because of a lack of equipment that we're not doing it here?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. So it's not because of a lack of equipment, but as this group would acknowledge, that commitment of 2,200 individuals has over 400 vehicle types that are deployed to Latvia. That required 3 container ships to send all that equipment over to Europe, and therefore we don't have those extra 400 vehicles, nor is that required. The vehicles that the individuals are using for that deployment are the ones that they need to conduct the pre-deployment training on so that they understand the systems and have the trust and confidence in using that equipment.
Okay, so we don't have the redundancy then here.
So 400 vehicles are currently, thank you for the question, Mr. Chair, 400 vehicles are currently deployed for the support of Latvia. We do not have a mirror complement of that equipment in Canada, nor is it required. And ultimately, the pre-deployment training has more benefits for more members of the alliance if conducted forward.
Thank you. Can you explain to us, not whoever is best, explain to us for the benefit of Canadians why, I think Canadians understand why we're supporting NATO. I'm not sure some Canadians understand why we are sending $6.5 billion to a non-NATO nation. Can you explain for the benefit of Canadians why we are doing that?
Thank you for the question, Mr. President. Mr. Chair, sorry. I mean, if Canadians understand the importance of NATO, it's our collective security. I think what we're also seeing, with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, illegitimate and illegal invasion of Ukraine, it has basically broken a peace that has stood in Europe since the Second World War, and it is basically attacking the values that Canadians stand for in terms of democracy, rule of law, and if Ukraine fails, then you have another the signal that it sends to not only to Russia but to other adversaries that you can survive with might can win over anything, and so therefore that is why Europeans have taken on sort of a lead in wanting to provide assistance to Ukraine, to protect Ukraine, to defend Ukraine, and from a Canadian perspective, that is the right thing to do. That is sort of protecting out there sort of our values and our norms à distance, if I can put it that way, and that's why we are also, as Canadians and the government of Canada, have been committed to supporting Ukraine.
I completely understand the sovereignty argument, and I completely agree with it. However, I mean, we've got warfare elsewhere. The DRC, for instance, 6 million people killed. Why Ukraine? Why is it in Canada's national interest to help Ukraine and not elsewhere?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. Again, this is a conflict that is happening on the border of NATO. We're a member of NATO. NATO allies are extremely concerned about the implications of failure to support or defend Ukraine in this context, and there are potentially downstream implications. Again, not only for Russia and what Russia might want to do vis-a-vis NATO in the future, should it win in Ukraine. I think it'll feel emboldened, but also what other adversaries are seeing in terms of the response from the West. Think of China, for example. Think of Iran. Think of South Korea in terms of how they would see a Western response to Ukraine that is insufficient.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just thank our witnesses for being here. Want to just follow up again, going back to the question of the NATO certification of Canadian troops with our allies in Latvia. It was reported by CBC that a large number of our personnel were unable to participate in that certification exercise because of a large number of vehicles. You said there's 400 vehicles there, but a bunch of them were not in service and unable to be used in that training exercise. Can you speak to why that happened?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. So inside the Department of Defense, we have what we call national procurement, and that is the characterization of funds that go to the sustainment of fleets of equipment, including vehicles. I would declare that the recent budget commitment has enabled major spare parts orders delivery, and we have undertaken that at speed. That said, the lack of past resourcing eroded a couple of things. First of all, the reserve stock that we had on the shelves of spare parts to sustain these fleets, as well as some of our long-standing suppliers, pivoted to other contracts, given that we'd had periods of time without contract. Time is required for industry to ramp up to need. In the specific case that was mentioned, tanks were at issue. Tanks, importantly, are an aging platform. They're facing obsolescence in the current variant that we have. It is not unique to Canada. The allies that are also using the Leopard tank have encountered the same shortfalls, and the war in Ukraine has intensified global demand against fixed production, and in some cases...
How many tanks were not available for that training exercise then? And if that is an issue in Latvia for us, is that meaning that our tanks that are here for training on, like at Edmonton and elsewhere, are unable to be used for training at this moment as well?
Thanks for the question, Mr. Chair. So of the 400 vehicles that are in Latvia, 17 of them have a Leopard tank chassis, 15 of them are main battle tanks, and 2 of them are armored recovery vehicles. Indeed, that fleet, I don't have the exact number of the 17 that were not up, that fleet is under duress as we're working with allies in Germany who generate. And I would just add that we always have to balance the global fleet demands. So while we privilege op reassurance for the reasons that are obvious to this table, there are other theaters that may require said capabilities, and we need to make sure that we're balancing domestic readiness with international readiness in different theaters.
Okay, I appreciate that. Let's get back to the incursion of Russian drones in Polish and Romanian airspace. Definitely the swarm that came into Poland seemed to weren't there by accident, weren't just testing airspace like we saw in Romania, which was just a fly-through. And you mentioned that Belarus was one of the destinations of where they were potentially launched from, if not flown over. What was the target in Poland? What were they going after? Was it material and supply lines for Ukraine that are originating out of Poland?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. So up front, we don't have conclusive confirmation about Russian intent. It is something on the classified level that we're monitoring carefully, both Canadian sources as well as in partnership with allies. We have seen more daring and provocative behavior from Russia. This is all about escalation management as they look to uncover what is the response of both NATO and states on the border in terms of time and capability and risk management.
Let's talk about escalation of Russia in Ukraine specifically. And you mentioned that they seem to be gaining little ground for a high cost, and we're hearing casualties of over 1 million people already from the Russian side. tanks, armored vehicles are, I'm hearing, are quite in a state of disrepair, that the Russians do not have availability, especially of main battle tanks anymore. How is that impacting the rationale of them going more and more to, Syed drones, using more hyperglide missiles and rockets, and attacking further inland than what we witnessed, such as more frequent bombings of Kiev and Lviv and other Ukrainian cities?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. So to be sure, as you've inferred, technology has expanded reach, scope, and endurance. We are seeing specifically in drone and missile technology iterative adjustments and iterative responses in defense on both sides of that battle space from which we continue to learn. You also made reference to Russian mobilization challenges, which are a thing. They have 3 times the population of Ukraine. And as you're aware, they've expanded the ranks of the Russian Federation Armed Forces 3 times since 2022, when the war started 3.5 years ago. They have a goal of expanding to 1.5 million individuals, and they are resulting to things like monetary initiatives, propaganda, and coercion to continue to fill their ranks. And they continue to maintain a strategic partnership with North Korea. As this table knows, in November of 2024, 12,000 DPRK soldiers were committed to the Kursk region, and we understand that there may still be north of 10,000 that are in Russian territory along that border.
Thank you, General. Over to you, Ms. Romanado. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And through you, I'd like to thank the witnesses for being here today. I just want to start off because there were some comments earlier that questioning Canada's participation with Op Reassurance. And as a proud founding member of NATO, it's imperative that people understand that what is happening in Ukraine is a menace to global security. We heard a little bit about Op Reassurance, the fact that we have renewed for 3 years. What will be the impact of that renewal of this operation for NATO's eastern flank, as well as detection and deterrence activities that NATO is leading in the region?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I think the extension of our mission is incredibly important to ensure our allies about our long-term commitment to deterrence on the eastern flank. Op Reassurance is the Canadian contribution to that, but all of our allies are deploying forces to the eastern flank to ensure that we are ready and able to deter future Russian aggression. And as we look at this escalation management that my colleague referred to, that we have forces that are ready to further escalate if the situation requires, so as to deter Russian aggression. That reinforcement that all of our allies are doing, I think, is incredibly significant. As I said before, it's the largest upscale in a generation. And it serves, I think, to reassure our allies that the alliance is solid from a unity point of view, that we are in this together, and that the territory of the alliance of all members will be defended, if there are future aggression. And I'll pass to either of my colleagues who may want to jump in, or not.
Unity. So recently, the Prime Minister and the Minister of National Defence announced Canada's additional $2 billion in military assistance from the G7 leaders meeting will go towards critical equipment, drones and electronics, ammunition and military equipment to strengthen air defence support. Can you tell us how these critical investments and tools will help on the ground?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I have the pleasure of managing our military assistance program to Ukraine. I'm very proud of the work that we've done to help ensure that some of those armored vehicles that members have referred to are no longer usable. It's an incredibly challenging space for the Ukrainians. There are, as we already alluded to, significant upticks in ballistic missile attacks and drone attacks. When we speak to the Ukrainians, they've underlined to us consistently the need for more investments in air defense, the need for more investments in artillery shells, the need for more investment in drones. Canada's played a proud part of that. We have recently announced a contribution to a U.S. NATO initiative, the Priority Ukraine Requirement List, which provides urgently needed high-end military equipment for the Ukrainians, including things like Patriot missiles. But we've also been able to make significant investments from Canadian industry to support the work that Ukraine is doing, both from a component point of view, but also from things like armored vehicles, from ammunition, and from other support. So the work that we do is helping Ukraine on the ground every day. We are always keen to do more, but we recognize, the need to make sure the investments that we are making are worthwhile and relevant for Canada and for Ukraine.
And Major General, would you agree that the importance of Canada's presence in the region and the training in the region, as you mentioned, in terms of readiness, is when you mentioned the deterrence in terms of the CRINCs, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, to deter and ensure display of force so that we are not dealing with additional conflict in the region from the CRINCs?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. So Canada is a resolute partner to NATO, and we've been leading with strength for that last decade, doing so alongside our 13 allies, as well as the flanks on the multinational brigades. We are seeing the interaction intensifying between adversaries, so China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. They seem to have unique relationships forming with transactional benefits in each circumstance. But to be sure, what's happening in Ukraine and what's happening with NATO on the eastern flank is sending a unified message to those adversaries that we are resolute in our resolve for the deterrence and defense of the partner nations.